gotta get we gotta get started. What do you think? Hello, everyone, and welcome. We have a nice turnout today, which I'm very grateful for because this is really I think a special occasion to have one of our own members who's become a central figure in the state energy planning space, and she's going to give a talk today. So this is the second meeting of our fall series on energy transition during the climate crisis. And for those who don't know us, the King's Chapel Environmental Action Initiative is a group at King's Chapel whose goal is to provide spiritual sustenance, information, camaraderie, and opportunities for action in the face of the climate emergency. The bell ringing you heard a minute ago is from our Paul Revere bell at the chapel, which we ring on the 11th of every month to sound the alarm that we're at the 11th hour of the climate crisis. And if you'd like to join us, we'll be doing it again on November 11th at 11 a.m. and everybody is welcome. So today we're privileged to host a founding member of our initiative, Dorie Seavey, and she's going to present a talk entitled The Massachusetts Natural Gas System at the Crossroads. So now we will hear from Cynthia.
Thank you, Kent. Well, it's a great group, and just want to let people know. Can you hear me all right? Yes? Nod? Yes, good. We open and close our meetings with a moment for reflection and a moment to really break away from the many activities of our day, to change gears and to open to what's being offered today. We have readings, 2 readings from Joanna Macy, who's an international environmental activist, a Buddhist scholar, a teacher of systems theory and deep ecology. I'll read a quote from her book, which is called Active Hope. She co-authored this with Chris Johnstone. So please listen as I read the words which I believe ring true for our engagement in environmental action, and especially true for our friend Dorie Seavey, and no doubt for each of us who have joined our conversation today. Active hope is a readiness to discover the strengths in ourselves and in others. A readiness to discover the reasons for hope and the occasions for love. A readiness to discover the size and strength of our hearts, our quickness of mind, our steadiness of purpose, our own authority, our love for life, the liveliness of our curiosity, the unsuspected deep well of patience and diligence, the keenness of our senses, and our capacity to lead. None of these can be discovered in an armchair or without risk. End quote. Kent will now introduce you to Dorie.
Yes, so Dorie received a PhD in economics from Yale and holds a master's in economics from the London School of Economics and a BA from Stanford. She's an applied research economist based in Boston, and at King's Chapel, she's treasurer and a member of the Environment Action Initiative. She was commissioned by Gas Leak Allies to write a report on the state of the Massachusetts Gas System Enhancement Program in its 6th year. And she produced quite an amazingly detailed, thorough report. It's been front page news in the Boston Globe twice in the last 10 days, and it's caught the attention of state legislators and the Massachusetts Attorney General. So she's going to summarize the report for us here. Welcome, Dorie.
Thank you. Thank you.
There.
Here
we go.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, Dorie, it's all yours.
I could not be more happy to be here this evening. I have been giving, a number of talks, and it's just so wonderful to look out and see so many friends and colleagues. I actually don't think that I would have undertaken this work or been led to this work if it were not for my spiritual home at King's Chapel, and particularly to my friends in the Environmental Action Initiative. It just meant the world to me. And, you know, as the Joanna Macy reading suggests, you know, we're being changed by the time that we live in now. We have to change our habits, what we purchase, how we live, and we're also being spiritually changed. And what I value most about the King's Chapel is the questioning, exploring that we do about what it means to live with integrity and character in what is often an unpredictable and unjust world, that at the same time is offering us an evolutionary moment, a moment of transition and transformation. And what we practice a lot, I think, at King's Chapel is faith and action that's grounded in courage and sacrifice, in faith and love and in infinite hope. And I find that core thing to be really important to getting me up every day. And it certainly was important in doing this report, which was probably one of the more painstaking research projects I've ever embarked on. So I hope that you have a chance to explore the document itself. It has 60 pages. If anybody loves footnotes, you're going to be so happy. It addresses a lot of areas, 6 substantive areas. But in my time here today, I want to first impart some things that you need to know about natural gas and the Gas System Enhancement Program, which is the state program that I studied. Just some have to know things. Second, I want to present my most important findings. There are 10 of those. And finally, give you my top level thinking about what needs to happen. So let me see what slide you're on there. Next slide, please. So let's just, I just want to remind you of some things about fossil gas. I'm going to call it fossil gas, not natural gas. Over half of the households in the Commonwealth heat their homes with gas. And all of this gas that we use in this state is imported. 80% comes from fracking fields in Western Pennsylvania, with all the environmental consequences of fracking. And some of it we get as liquid natural gas from foreign countries. It sits in the harbor in big tankers. About 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions of our state come from fossil gas. And those emissions have increased 60% since 1990 because we're substituting away from oil towards natural gas. And the emissions come from combusting fossil gas in our homes, in our businesses, but they also come from leaking gas. And they have those two things, combusting and leaking, have different emissions. The leaking gas is 98% methane, which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas that's 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over the first 20 years. Fossil gas is not natural. It should be in the ground. It's not clean. When we combust it in our homes, toxic gases are released, and it's essentially equivalent to living with a smoker. It's highly correlated with asthma rates and other breathing diseases. It's also a safety hazard because it's explosive. The last thing I want to say in just terms of an energy snapshot is that right now, we're approaching a sentinel price inflection point where electricity is going to become cheaper than gas. And that's a really important foundational price change that's necessary, but not sufficient for guiding the future. It's not sufficient because of the power of the corporate interests at stake in the fossil fuel industry. Next slide, Kent. So let's start with just a brief summary of what GSEP is. So GSEP, again, is the Gas System Enhancement Program. It was put into place by the legislature in 2014 with the goal of replacing aging gas distribution infrastructure. Massachusetts has the second oldest gas distribution infrastructure in the country. It provides for accelerated cost recovery of the utilities capital spending. So that's why they like this program, because they get their money back sooner, actually some of it before it's even spent. The goal was to enhance safety and to reduce methane leaks. It does fund certain repairs for significant environmental impact leaks. Those are known as SEI leaks. But otherwise, what it really incentivizes is the opening up of the street and the replacement of the big gas mains and also the service lines that go off the mains to our meters. 6 investor-owned gas companies participate in this program. The Department of Public Utilities, otherwise known as DPU, is the public agency in charge of regulating these companies and administering the program. And DPU is part of the executive branch. The Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs also has some oversight responsibility for methane emissions. Next slide. This slide shows a picture of the gas territories in Massachusetts, the 6 investor-owned companies, and then the pink ones are the 4 municipal-owned territories. So in purple, you have National Grid, which has 2 divisions, the Boston division, which is the one up north, and then the Colonial division, which is down on Cape Cod. And then all the green is the 2 Eversource companies. And then there are 3 other much smaller companies. Next slide. As part of what you need to know about GSEP, I want to just say a few words about how gas companies make money. So they're not, I mean, they make money selling the gas and supplying us with energy, but they make far more of their profit by building and replacing infrastructure, such as the pipes that carry gas to our homes and businesses. So they're really in the pipe business. And how they make a profit is illustrated in the graph. So say you're a gas company and you want to spend $100 million this year to replace old pipes. And let's assume that's the $100 million in the first column on the left. And let's assume these pipes have an economic life of 30 years and that your regulator, the DPU, has allowed you to earn a 10% rate of return on your spending. And 10%, by the way, is the average allowed return in Massachusetts. Then after 30 years, what you get back is the column on the right. In inflation-adjusted dollars, you get back the capital you spent, plus an additional $129 million in profit because of the rate of return. So from a consumer perspective, a dollar that the utilities spend today on infrastructure and replacement results in 30 years in a $2 cost to the ratepayers. Next slide. So let's look again at how we pay for gas and for the GSEP program. This is a bill from the website of National Grid for the winter of 2019. 100% of all GSEP costs are paid for by us, by the ratepayers, including the cost of lost gas due to leaks. So there are 2 broad charges on your gas bill. There's the supplier charge. Here it's $22.37. It's based on the number of therms of gas that you use. And then there's a gas delivery charge, which is essentially twice that of the supply charge. And the GSEP tariff is embedded in that gas delivery charge. That charge is made up of a number of factors, and GSEP is basically, I would say, hidden in there because it's never really reported to customers. Next slide. If anybody says anything about GSEP, you need to remember that not all gas companies are created alike. National Grid Boston is the big gorilla. It's the linchpin to GSEP. It's the linchpin to our gas leak problem in this state. And it's the linchpin to all of our methane problems. So National Grid Boston accounts for nearly 60% of the designated leak-prone pipe inventory. Another 30% is accounted for by the two Eversource companies. Again, to underscore that National Grid plays this outsized role. Next slide. I didn't sufficiently appreciate this at the beginning, but GSEP is administered and managed in a piecemeal fashion, company by company. I was shocked by this, but there are no program-wide metrics for this program. There are no interim target goals. There is only one overview report that DPU provides in December of every year. I critique this report heavily in my report. So what I had to rely on was programmatic details and statistics that are buried in literally thousands of pages of gas company filings at the online file room of the DPU. In my opinion, the DPU and the GSEP program is concerningly short on accountability and transparency. Next slide. So we're going to turn now to the key findings of the report. The next slide. We're going to begin with the topic of gas leaks. And what you're seeing here, the image, is from the energy nonprofit called HEAT. It's HEET. It's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it uses DPU data to locate, on geographic maps, all the leaks. So this is all the leaks for National Grid Boston as of January 1st, 2021. At the HEAT website, you can look up similar statistics for any community or any company. But one of the key findings of my report is that based on the evidence that I looked at, there is no clear or compelling evidence of reduced leaks. And no evidence of reduced leak rates, and no evidence of declining methane emissions for the GSEP program as a whole. So in terms of the overall number of leaks, we're certainly repairing or eliminating leaks each year, but we're treading water. So through 2019, 15,000 to 18,000 leaks were repaired or eliminated each year, but each year began with a backlog of unrepaired leaks that was roughly equal to those that were fixed. And so we're always moving forward with this deficit. Next slide. In their 2020 GSEP filings, the gas companies emphasized that they are beginning to shift their replacement work to the projects that are the most difficult, the most complex, the most expensive. And of course, these projects tend to be located in urban centers. Environmental justice populations have been disadvantaged by prior prioritization strategies because they tend to be co-located in these more dense, congested urban areas where people are disproportionately exposed to gas leaks. Next slide. My report details important advancements in pipe repair and leak monitoring technologies that I knew nothing about beforehand. And, just like you can go to the hospital and have advanced heart surgery where they don't rip open your chest, in many cases now it's possible to avoid intensive pipe replacement and instead, at much lower cost, extend the life of a pipe by inserting a new pipe inside the old one using sleeving methods or robotic tools. This especially works well for larger diameter pipes. But GSEP doesn't incentivize this. It's stacked against a strategic and accelerated approach to fixing leak. And instead, it incentivizes replacing pipe because of the profit margin that I spoke about earlier. When you repair a pipe, it's just considered an operational expense on your P&L, and you're not creating an asset that goes on your balance sheet. So the graph here just considers a single year, 2020, and in that year, gas companies spent $540 million to replace pipes, but only $40 million to repair leaks. And in the industry, it's well known that to repair a leak typically costs between $4,000 and $5,000. So if you take the extant number of leaks today and repaired all the ones that made sense to repair, it would cost us about $124 million compared to the over $500 million that we're spending to replace pipes. Next slide. I'm really concerned about GSEP's timeframe. The legislators who wrote, the statute in 2014 gave it a 20-year timeline, but they also gave DPU the latitude to give extensions. And so DPU has granted extensions to some of the companies, and for all intents and purposes, the effective time frame is now 25 years, ending in 2039. But I find that even that extended time frame is unlikely to be achieved. And the reason is that it will take at least, and this is just using simple math, nothing fancy, it will take National Grid at least until 2043 to replace all the miles of leak-prone pipe that it has. And that assumes that no additional pipe is added to National Grid's leak-prone inventory. So the elephant in the room, to me, is the implications for cost recovery, because if we're still installing new pipe in 2043, and let's say that pipe has an economic life of 30 or 60 years, we're going to be depreciating that pipe until the end of this century and maybe into the next century. And essentially, we're talking about our grandchildren continuing to pay for this pipe. Next slide. I wanted to show this graph of the replacement work and plans for National Grid Boston. And I got this just from their own reporting. I didn't come up with any of this. And it shows you what they have replaced so far, the fluctuations. And there was 2018 was the Merrimack Valley explosions, which did not occur in the National Grid Boston territory, but it depressed all of GSEP activity. And then there was also a strike with National Grid Boston. So then things have rebounded up to 91 miles in 2019, 86 in 2020. National Grid Boston says it's really been affected a lot by COVID, but it's promising a big acceleration in its replacement work, which you can see plotted out there. And I'm worried about this too, because the disruption to municipalities, to the streets, to traffic flow, business activity, it also has safety implications, because as I said, the Merrimack, or I didn't say this, but the Merrimack Valley explosions actually were the result of work being conducted for a GSEP project. So it's dangerous when this work is done. It's particularly dangerous when it's in congested urban environments. Next slide. Another finding is that the goalpost keeps moving down the field. So I detail in the report, yes, we have replaced 1,348 miles of main since 2014, but at the same time, DPU has accepted additional 1,000 additional miles into the inventory of leak-prone pipe. So we're a little bit ahead, but not much. But DPU and the companies aren't very transparent about this. In addition, I studied the methane reduction program of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And in their December 2020 report, they said that National Grid Boston will need to reclassify 1,600 miles of leak-prone pipe. So it was considered not leak-prone, and the idea is that it may now be leak-prone for whatever reason. And this would essentially increase National Grid's Boston's leak-prone inventory by 50%. This could be kind of a big nail in the coffin if that actually occurs. But DPU has been silent about this. Next slide. In Massachusetts today, the average cost to replace 1 mile of pipe is $1.95 million. That's a weighted average that I calculated. It ranges from about $800,000 for Liberty Utilities, which operates in the Fall River, North Attleboro, Westport region, all the way up to $2.6 million in the National Grid Boston area. Next slide. The costs for the 3 largest companies increased basically 16 to 17% per year since inception of this program. And on this slide, what I show is cost acceleration for National Grid Boston, with unit costs increasing at 18% per year since 2017. You can see the report for my analysis of the factors that the companies say are driving up their costs, but you have to assume a lot of cost acceleration in this program, particularly as we get towards the more urban projects. Next slide. So GSEP has become a mega project, and it's on track to be the largest, most expensive infrastructure project in Massachusetts, but most people have never heard of it. Most people have heard of the Big Dig, and the total costs of GSEP, in my opinion, are going to be right up there with the Big Dig. So for some of us, the photo on this slide may bring back memories. In hindsight, you know, the Big Dig did bring us the Greenway, which is beautiful, and it did bring us a new airport tunnel, but that mega project was soaring cost overruns, clocked in at $27 billion in 2019 dollars. And I show here my estimate of GSEP in the same dollars. And essentially my estimate of its total cost ranges from $23 billion to $31 billion. And the range depends on the depreciation time horizon and the assumptions that you make about increasing unit costs. Next slide. So how the heck is all this going to be paid for? What's the plan? Essentially, there is no plan that is offered to ratepayers. So what's important to understand, and it needs to be modeled, you know, I can't really do that. But I can raise concerns about it. But here are the things at play. The gas customer base is shrinking, all right? It's going to shrink as electricity becomes cheaper than gas. And we're just about at that tipping point, which I mentioned earlier. So fewer customers, lower volumes of gas will be demanded, and all things equal, gas company revenue will decline unless rates go up and pipe replacement continues. So utilities are going to be petitioning for 2 things. One, shorter asset lives for their pipes, because that allows them to recover their costs more quickly. And secondly, they're going to petition for higher returns to equity. The argument being that, wow, things are really risky here, particularly with the Commonwealth's climate goals, and it's harder to raise investor capital. And we actually see concrete evidence of those 2 petitions in the recent rate case of National Grid Boston, which recently concluded. So accelerating cost recovery and increasing the rate of return are going to drive up GSEP's payback costs and increase gas rates for customers. And we're really looking, I think, at a program that offers the prospect of substantial stranded costs. So that means you retire an asset before you've recovered the cost of it. And I'm really concerned that the worst case would be that state bailouts would be needed using taxpayer money to pay the utilities back. They're not going to walk away and just write off the assets on their books. And for ratepayers, the clear course that we're on is that households that can afford to will leave the gas system and endure the fixed costs of getting an induction stove, buying heat pumps, and hopefully they're going to be good state and federal subsidies for that, and the households will be left kind of holding the money bag, paying for GSEP will be lower income households who cannot afford that transition, and or who have landlords who are not able or not willing to make that transition off of fossil gas. So stranded costs on the one hand and inequitable rate burdens for lower income households on the other side. So next slide, please. It's quite disconcerting that GSEP is not aligned with the state's climate goals. There's no way anybody could argue that it is. It does have a goal of reducing methane emissions, but that goal is not explicitly or rigorously or successfully tied to any of the Commonwealth's mandated climate goals. And the DPU and the gas companies claim that methane emissions are declining, but there really isn't any credible evidence of that. So what they'll do is say, well, we replaced X miles of pipe and the federal emissions factor of the leak rate for pipes is X. And so you multiply the number of miles times the leak factor, and you get the number of metric tons of methane that you say you've reduced things by. I have, I think, the latest scientific evidence in a section of the report that shows how the emissions factors that DPU, the gas companies, and the mass DEP are using are just not robust, and they're outdated, and the methodologies are really flawed. Next slide. The lack of, GSEP's lack of alignment with the state's climate goals is in my view, deepened by answers that the gas companies gave in their 2020 filings with the DPU. Two questions that were posed by the Attorney General's office. They were asked whether or not they are considering the introduction of hydrogen into their gas systems. Now, hydrogen's a gas just like natural gas. And 5 of the 6 investor-owned gas companies stated that they consider their GSEP pipe to be hydrogen ready. So this raises the concern that, again, the gas companies are not being transparent, that GSEP may not be so much about shoring up the existing fossil gas system, but instead using this program to get the gas system ready for hydrogen blending. A strategy that many of us think would be at odds with the state's climate mandates, since for the foreseeable future, hydrogen will depend almost entirely on natural gas for its manufacture. There's very little green hydrogen that's available in the United States, and it's certainly not available for transmitting in gas lines. So hydrogen, I've been beginning to learn about it, but it's another explosive, climate damaging gas that many believe is not an appropriate gas to be piped into our homes. And we need to be vigilant about efforts by the gas companies to promote hydrogen, biofuels, synthetic fuels as clean energy alternatives, because so far they're really not. Next slide. So I'm getting to the end here. I spent 9 months looking at this program, and it was a big research adventure, and it took a lot of perseverance. I am struck by how GSEP made broad sense back in 2014 to the legislators, to the Attorney General, to certain advocates. But things have really changed in the last 7 years. Our world has changed. We're living now in a time of severe climate emergency, so that even if GSEP were perfectly run and managed, the fundamental presupposition of that program that the gas distribution system would be good for another 60 years isn't valid anymore. And the incentives of this program, in my opinion, are aligned with something that we don't want anymore. And what we need to be incentivizing instead, and Betsy Peterson has spoken about this in previous presentations to the King's Chapel Environmental Action Initiative. What we need instead is triage and transition. 2 T's. So triage, by triage, what we mean is to aggressively and strategically repair the worst leaks, the largest ones, the most hazardous ones, the most climate damaging ones. No one is suggesting that we need to walk away from the gas system. That would be irresponsible. We have to go after the big leaks and the hazardous leaks. And even a small leak can ultimately be very hazardous because the gas accumulates in a confined space and then explodes. The transition piece is that I hope we can get some brilliant legislators to figure out how to redirect GSEP's substantial financing mechanism. We're talking about being able to produce $600 million of operating capital every year, how to redirect that away from shoring up the gas system and instead toward investments in clean and renewable energy. So I'm going to end there. What I most hope is that this report can play a positive role in moving the challenge of the gas transition to front and center. Making that transition is imperative. Doing it as soon as we can is really important, and it's going to be a huge step for each of us in our personal lives and for the Commonwealth, for the country, for the world. So there we have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorie. Thank you. We've had a few questions, or mostly comments in the chat. So I think what we should do is open up to folks who have questions by a raise of hands, and we'll call on you. One of the Gary Riccio was giving a lot of comments on the disincentives and the incentives for gas companies to change. And he also was citing some resources to further explain the risks involved with mega projects. I don't know if Gary, you want to comment on that anymore?
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
Gary?
Hi, I think Dorie's presentation kind of speaks for itself. I mean, some firms can be induced by their consumers to behave ethically, but in general, we can expect firms just to behave rationally within their incentives. And I think what Dorie has shown us is that we're incentivizing firms to behave against the public interest. Mm-hmm. So, you know, these recommendations that she mentioned, you know, and the appeal to legislators and ultimately lobbyists who can influence these legislators to change the rules of the game is where we have to go. But I mean, just the presentation is compelling. It makes it very simple. It's this is why things are the way they are. Yeah. How could they be any other way? In terms of the mega project, I just gave one reference. Ben Foubert is a Danish scholar who has provided, actually generated a very large community of researchers in mega project research. And with the experience we are aware of in the Big Dig is not unusual. I mean, it's almost universal.
Yeah.
And we need to be very aware that there is strategic misinformation at the beginning of a mega project that hides all the kinds of information that Dorie very laboriously over 9 months had to uncover. So, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weight that could be brought behind what Dorie is trying to get people to face.
Thank you, Gary. And Gary, in the chat, if you want to see that resource, he does have the name of the person who was done this research. Jeffrey Barsnell wanted to comment that Representative Lori Ehrlich has filed a gas leaks and system transformation bill over the last few sessions, and some of us heard about that today, but that is good news, very good news. Rosemary Keene is asking, what's your thinking about the governor's approval of new gas infrastructure, the West Roxbury pipeline and Weymouth compressor station? Dorie, can you address that?
You know, Governor Baker is very aligned with the gas industry. I mean, so it doesn't surprise me. I think it's a big problem, and I stand with the folks who are opposing both of those projects. We just, you know, recently the Columbia Gas was the company that went bankrupt and was you had lawsuits against it because of the Merrimack Valley explosion, and it was acquired by Eversource Gas of Massachusetts. And they just came out with a safety assessment, which is now asking for $800 million, not GSEP, but other stuff to just improve the safety of that system. And it includes retrofits to liquid natural gas facilities, and it's just the more money we pour into this, the deeper in the hole we're going to be. But like I said, fixing the big leaks, the most hazardous leaks, is imperative.
Mm-hmm. Another question, Dorie. Could you comment on the new legislation that was just mentioned? Is transitioning to network heat pumps using the gas pipe infrastructure realistic?
Well, that's the future of heat bill that was filed by Representative Lori Ehrlich, as well as a lot of other representatives and senators. And Betsy has spoken about that some in the past two meetings. And I think that Kent will be organizing the late November meeting to also focus on things we can do. So I expect at that meeting, we're going to be delving into more of the details of the future of heat legislation. I strongly support it. It will really make a difference in terms of reversing and undoing some of these perverse incentives that I mentioned. For example, the perverse incentive to replace rather than repair. It will also permit gas companies to sell thermal energy, because essentially, you know, they need a different business model, and whether they can get it together to transition, I don't know. But one possible business model is to sell geothermal energy. So you can't run the water through the gas pipes. You have to drill down a couple hundred feet. You need to put in new pipes, but they're going to carry water, and they're not going to carry a flammable gas. So gas companies know how to drill, they know how to install pipes, and there are two demonstration projects, one with Eversource, and I hope one with NSTAR, that will be exploring, you know, the economics of networked geothermal in Massachusetts. Right now they're choosing the site. So stay tuned for the meeting later on in November, because we'll talk about the future of heat. But I also want to talk next time about, you know, how each of us can make a plan, start thinking about a plan to decarbonize our homes, decarbonize our lifestyles, because that's a big piece of all of this too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's another question from Michael. Are there similar projects underway in other states?
It's a really good question, and it's the next thing I want to research. But I found a report that shows that it was a gas industry report, but 41 other states plus the District of Columbia that have pipe replacement programs. Now, whether that they have this accelerated feature, I don't know, but I have heard from colleagues that the whole Boston-Washington corridor has a lot of similarity to Massachusetts, not in the scale so much, but similar problems of public programs that are trying to replace a lot of gas structure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another question from Joy. Could you describe the various political actors involved? It seems the program's primarily been in effect in the Charlie Baker administration, which began in 2015, January 2015. How are DPU appointments made, and what has the position of the Attorney General been in filings before the DPU?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The Attorney General, we gave the Attorney General a draft of this paper a couple months before we released it, and we gave it to Rebecca Tepper, who is head of the appropriate division of the AGO, and they went over it with a fine-tooth comb, and they're very supportive of it. She was really struck by the findings. They did not disagree with my data. And they are really limited by the statute, because the statute is both very expansive but very limiting. So the statute only requires this one report, and the statute doesn't require any metrics, but the statute allows DPU to extend the time frame and to incorporate Morley chrome height. So when they asked 2 climate questions in the 2020 proceedings, DPU and the utilities really didn't have to answer that, because it's not part of what you're supposed to talk about when you interpret the proceedings very narrowly in scope. So, the AGO's job is to protect consumers, and they've done an amazing job arguing as best as they can in all of these proceedings. And I have a lot of respect for them. They're so smart and so capable, but they're really limited by statute. We were just actually, a colleague of mine were just today speaking with the state auditor, but it turns out the auditor may not be, you have to have a public agency that has a public funding stream to get audited. So I'm not sure that that's a solution. I think we might be interested in knocking on your door of the Inspector General. I don't know if anybody here has any contacts there. Senator Barrett and Representative Roy are head of the Joint Committee on Technologies, Utility and Energy. And Senator Barrett said he was blown away by this report. He strongly supports it, and I think you'll see him as a strong source of new legislation to try and give DPU more structure in this program, but also to encourage transition away from fossil gas. But the Senator Theoridis and Governor Baker have been silent on the report and the issues that have been spoken about in the press. The other big article that was about natural gas that Kent mentioned is about the so-called 2080 process. And so that is this process that will play out over the next 6 months. The utilities are required to hire a consultant to help them make a plan for how they're going to help the Commonwealth achieve net zero by 2050. It's an article that's worth reading. I mean, it points out that, does it make sense for the utilities to hire their own consultant to do this? Shouldn't it be an independent consultant that doesn't report to them? But that's not the way the DPU set it up. But there's a lot of opportunities for stakeholder participation in that process. But it's a consulting firm that has a bunch of scenarios that it's parsing out, and a lot of the stakeholders are not happy with the scenarios. We fought and fought, and now we have gotten this consulting firm to agree to have a scenario which requires the complete decommissioning of the natural gas system.
Great.
So that was a big achievement, but we'll see what happens.
That's good. Dorie, Kent asked, could you elaborate on the environmental justice implications of the current state plan to replace gas with electricity, one home or building at a time?
Yeah, it's so sad. It's Mass Save, just need to be completely revamped. And I would think we'd be able to do that. But it's one building at a time, and it doesn't help lower income households. And right now, as the Globe has pointed out, it's incentivizing people to switch from oil to natural gas, but it's not incentivizing the next step, which is to electrify. There is some support for weatherization, but that, in my view, is an abysmal failure, but it's gotten a lot of bad press. So I wonder what's happening.
So Todd Lee has a question. Are there any similarly scaled boondoggles going on in other industries? That's such a Todd Lee word. Or is this the most egregious violation of the public view that you know of? If you can answer that, Dorie.
Well, how about if some of you comment on that? One boondoggle, so that's nothing's jumping to mind. I mean, every day I read the paper, I'm blown away by something. But that's why we all have to, walk this path of hope together. And the more of us who walk on it, the more the path gets formed. So I can't think of one right now. But I do agree with the boondoggle word with regard to GSEP.
That's most of the questions. Are there any other questions or any that I haven't captured in the chat? Did you respond about, has the Inspector General been made aware of the report? I think you did this one.
We haven't, we just got that idea today. So
good.
Yeah. Does anybody know the Inspector General?
Come on, hands up. Who knows? Okay. Good.
I think, yeah, it is definitely a story of, it's a climate story. It's a story of poor government management. It's a story of lack of accountability and transparency, for sure, all those things. So thank you all for coming. As I said, it's just wonderful to see all of you, and stay tuned for our next meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Dorie. I think Kent is going to finish us up here.
Yes, I'm going to finish you off.
Finish us up.
Thank you, Dorie. I mean, I am sure, and everybody else is humbled by how much sacrifice you've made personally to do this report. It's just astonishing. So all the rest of us have got to help the state do something with this report. And that's what I hope we can do. So as you can see from the slides, there's just a couple of notes, and I'll be happy to send these links around to everybody who attended the meeting. But if you want to read up on the issue some more, there's of course Dorie's report itself. There were actually 2 Boston Globe articles. I've linked to one of them here. And Gas Leak Allies, which sponsored the report, has some very good information. And they actually recorded an earlier talk by Dorie and Senator Barrett and Marie Balin Powers, who's from Chelsea and an advocate for environmental justice. And that's well worth watching. That's on the Gas Leaks Allies website. And Betsy's been our main connection to Mothers Out Front. They've got a lot going out there, and they also sponsored a talk that was today that's been mentioned that was really fascinating about more about the proposed legislation particularly. And as Dorie said, the next time we meet, that is the Future of Heat bill, and I've actually got a link to the information about that bill here. And our next meeting will be on November 22nd. That's a Monday. Same time, and we're going to try and look at what we can do, what we can do to help support the right kind of legislation, make changes in our own lives, and take this information and take action with it. And if any of you want to join our mailing list, you can email me at kentwit@gmail.com. We'd love to have you join us. Now we go over to Julie Hyde for our closing reading.
Thank you, Kent, and thank you so much, Dorie. Your report has been electrifying to a lot of us, and we're so grateful for your commitment. And I turn back to Joanna Macy's wisdom in closing this meeting based on her reflection that grace happens when we act with others on behalf of our world. And I feel as though this is a moment of grace for us. You've started something, you've sparked something wonderful. Her reading is, this is an evolutionary moment for humans and the earth. We can't go on as before, but we don't know what the alternative is. There's no blueprint. What we can become will be born out of trust in each other and sorrow about what hasn't worked, the damage that we have done. Remember that we are capable of love. The future will grow out of our trust and love. Hang on to the call you feel to care for the earth and each other. Thank you, Dorie.